The Avatars by A.E., pen name for George William Russell. This is an unabridged audiobook read by Josh Mitteldorf, and you're in segment 3. It was Midsummer Eve. A fairy stillness was in the air. The only glow came from that girdle of green fire which all night long lay about the earth in midsummer nights. Paul and the poet sat on a hillock, looking over the deserted sands to a long black ridge, lying like some monstrous animal half on earth and half crouched in water. There were apparitions like silver stars that glowed and went out and glowed again and ran along the blackness of the ridge. "See the fairy lights," whispered Paul. "They hold festival tonight. It is Midsummer Eve. Do you see, below there on the sands, those tall flame-colored people who move in some mystic ritual? How lovely! How wonderful! Their dance seems to be God-guided. Are they those who never fall out of Eden? They move all with the innocence of unfallen life. Are we to go back to their world? Oh no, these are only the slaves of light. That life lies far behind us. We, I think, shall go back to a brighter light than that which opened up the story of the cycles. Something is going to happen, Paul. What is it? Is a new religion to be born? What magic will it exercise over us? I hope it will be the magic of the gay. Are they not terrible in their sadness, these religions of the Iron Age? The light is never hailed with joy. The light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth not. He came to his own, and his own received him not. The mystery is told in tears, as if we must understand sorrow better than joy. The real betrayal of Jesus was not by Judas, but by the other apostles, who would not speak of the laughter of Jesus. He who went to feasts and merriments, gay at heart, as all must be who know their immortality. I pine for something gay and beautiful. I swear to you, Paul, I want to wear cap and bells before the throne, to clash cymbals and dance, not abase myself before the Lord with my nose in the dust and my hinder parts pointed to the heavens like crawling saints in the religious pictures. They both broke into laughter. The spell of the fairy stillness was broken. They rose and went their ways, the poet to Conaire, whose guest he was. "I love that old man," he said. Paul went his own way, but after his lively companion had departed, the spell of midsummer night, the most enchanted night in the year, when the barriers between this world and that other are fragile, fell on him again. There was a wild restlessness in body and soul. Imaginations crowded on him. His feet, unconsciously to himself, began to move swiftly, driven by an energy born in the psyche. He drew nigh his cottage, but turned away again, and strode across the dark miles of sand. He walked like one pursued not by terrifying but by noble furies who pelted him with celestial fire. He was overwhelmed. His body was unable to bear the hurricane of power, and at last, below that long black ridge of rock, half fainting, he sat down on a stone and buried his head upon his knee. As he sat there, he became more still. The horizon of the soul seemed to widen, to spread far beyond the body to a distant light. Whether it rushed at him, or whether he was born to it, he could not afterwards say, but in imagination he was buoyed up on some shining ether which welled, a dazzling fountain, from the heart of earth. Where the fountain broke out of anima mundi, in the blinding center he saw the likeness of a being white as sunfire. What was that being? A celestial singer? A heavenly poet? A magician of the beautiful? From it poured dazzling images and forms of ethereal loveliness. It was that being that had blown on him with fiery breath. From it came that hurricane of imaginations. The light illuminated earth and its children from within. It searched out every heart. It came with a burning message to those who seemed to wear the color of truth. Paul remembered ancient legends of his country, of a fountain which flowed invisibly, bathing the soul. He was wondering what god had unsealed that fountain, and then the fierce illumination faded. But before it departed, eyes that seemed to have looked only on eternity looked into his own, and he was awed as if omniscience was pondering upon him. With its fading came the face of a child, and then he was back in himself, and he was seated on his stone, alone in the night, looking over the desert miles of sand. He sat there long, and at last went homeward, filled with a spiritual exaltation. He knew the tongues of fire with which he had been baptized would be wisdom in him, and the will of the power would be seen in the works of his hands. Chapter 11. The day following that midsummer night was heavenly still and clear. A pure and silver glory pervaded the blue air. The clouds on far horizons bowed low like young awed cherubim. The waters in the lake hardly stirred, parting their lips as if to sing, but were silent, breathing only joy deep in each other. Everything, light, water, air, cloud, and rocky earth, seemed to belong to an unfallen nature. Paul himself, the last night's tumult of vision and imagination stilled, felt ethereally light within. He might have been one of the earth's unfallen children, ere Eden was clouded from their eyes. He sat as in a trance, gazing on a nature that seemed living from earth to utmost distance of sky. It was gazing at him, that living nature, as he was gazing back into it. The magical fingers of air and light made music in his being, playing as on a lute string by heaven. How had man lost that vision of infinite life? What had they thought precious enough to turn them from the endless wonders created by that mighty artist who at his feet made the melody of the flowers, each a miracle of art, wild rose, orchid, honeysuckle, fern? If they had been dilated to the immensity of space, they would still have been flawless. There were depths within these marvelous depths, worlds within worlds, and heavens beyond the heaven of heavens, each with its divine populace. The majesty which held constellations and galaxies, suns, stars, and moons inflexibly in their paths, could yet throw itself into infinite, minute, delicate forms of loveliness with no less joy. And he knew that the tiny grass might whisper its love to an omnipotence that was tender toward it. What he had felt was but an infinitesimal part of that glory. There was no end to it. There was a rustle of feet in the grass behind him. He turned and saw Carew, who came and sat down beside him and lay there in a long silence. Some magic had stilled for a while the restless flame of his mind, and it was only after an hour had passed that he began to speak dreamily. I think the golden age has returned. Everything one imagined seems possible. This day is the forgiveness of sins, and when the God forgives, there is no withholding of love. Everything is as it was on the first day. We are made virginal and receive once more the primal blessings of ecstasy and beauty. If one of the gods leaned out of that hollow air now and said, Philim, come with me, I would take his hand and climb up the airy way to his home and think it only natural that we should be friends. His greatness and my littleness, I would sing him my songs and he would make wonders for me by his art. Paul, there must be some way of getting out of the body. While I was lying here, I asked myself, why were we prisoners? Why are we so tied to grass and stones, tied to ourselves still more? I am like a thief of pent and solitary confinement in a cell. I am packed round with thick clay and bound to the bone. Outside, I can see what treasures there are. What galleys laden with stars sail to unknown beaches. How rich the kingdom must be when the king can scatter his jewels so prodigally on moths and butterflies. If I could get out of my cell, the psyche would have wings for far flights. What a universe there would be to loot if we were out of our cells. If the Lord hear me talking, he will know what to expect if I break prison. He laughed. Oh, I'm so happy today I could clap my hands and dance. But no, I must not. I feel tender to everything living. See, I lift my feet from the ground, lest I hurt my fellow prisoners, grass and flowers. Oh, little Pumpernickel, who stare up at me so gallantly, do not fear me. I am no ogre. I am only a little looser on my legs than you are. You too, little ruddy star, will get free. It may be eons away, but assuredly you will get free, and you will mount so high that you will glow on air, a burning blossom, looking down on earth below, and its people will fold their palms and adore you. Everything, little Pimpernel, is hurrying Godward, and you will get there, changing from flower to star on the way. You believe that, Paul? Yes, I believe everything you say. And why not? The atom is always trembling into the infinite in our imagination, and it is right, for the atoms are the creation of the infinite, and they bear signs of that majestic ancestry. The final gift of the infinite to its children will be itself. I am prodigal of intuitions today. Is there not something different in earth, as if it had wakened from long sleep, its soul had come back to its body? And now it has wakened, its body is flushed with magical life. That is not the water of yesterday, nor the air, nor the earth. Some heavenly wine is mixed with the water, and in the air we breathe there is a mingling of the holy breath. Earth is living under our feet. It was in a world like this ages ago. All the mythologies and fairy tales were born, and they were all true, true to something in our own being. Once more, there can be natural spirituality. I went out early this morning and I was reborn. Why do we ever sleep at the hour of miracles? I made them this song, or it made itself for me. O dark holy magic to steal out at dawn, to dip face and feet in grasses the dew trembles on, ere its might of spirit healing be broken by the dawn. Oh, to reel drunken on the heady dew, to know again the virgin wonder that boyhood knew, while words run to music, giving voices to the voiceless dew. They will make those dawn-wandering lights and airs, the bowed worshipping spirits, to shine like theirs. They will give to thy lips an aeolian music like theirs. That natural spirituality is growing around us in the folk we meet. Conair has natural spirituality. So have you. It is in many others, and you must meet them, Paul. You are becoming a hermit with only mountains and stones for companions. They are good company, but I want you to give up this afternoon and this night to come with me for a tramp. You shall choose your own way. Spiritual gravitation will bring us to our kin, or if it brings us only to other hills, then these are our kinsmen also. There are adorable people living about among these mountains whom you would love. It is as easy to walk in and out of their minds as if you had known them for 1,000,000 years. I feel so certain you must meet some of these spiritual kinsmen that I will not show you the way. They may not be better company than the stones of the field with which you are in league, but they know you are here, and they will talk to you, and they are transparent as crystal. I called them by their Christian names when I met them first. It is delightful to speak by their intimate names to friends without knowing what other names they have. Chapter 12. I will take then the hill road southward, said Paul. It is easier to walk on the high ridges than on the level road. Yes, I found that too. It must have been on a hilltop that Antaeus wrestled with Hercules. It is on the hills the earth spirit puts fire into one's feet every time we touch her. Is it that earth breath you painted in serrations of flame about the sacred mountain? That was a vision. I only know after a while when I lie in the hillside with closed eyes that the dusk disappears under my eyelids. I see waves of brilliant color. Never is imagination so vivid. The barrier between worlds is fragile there, and one can peer from this world to that as through a transparency. All roads are easy to the traveler with whom imagination is a companion. The leagues dwindle to furlongs, and the mountains to mounds. After a time they paused at the highest point of the ridge. The artist lay back on the heather, while his friend wandered about. Paul looked up into blue deeps of air, like those seers before whose gaze, concentrated on a crystal, visionary forms appear. He had found his magic mirrors for vision in deep pools of water and the vaster ocean of air. Gazing into the first mirror of water, he had passed through it into lustrous worlds which lay within the being of earth, and often looking into that other mirror of cloudless blue, he had seen its depths stained with brilliant color, palaces glowing with amethyst, gold, and every hue of the rainbow, and there moved the cloud-brilliant populace of sky. One mirage of remote beauty after another had enchanted his eyes fixed on that mirror. Gradually he lost himself in those depths. He heard faintly the footsteps of his friend who moved about, and at last, half in a dream, he heard the voice of the poet. He looked around. Carew, with shut eyes, was standing beside him, his hands groping as if to touch some invisible thing. The poet's voice came to him wholly out of his dream. I feel blown by an invisible wind inward. Though I am steady on my legs, I tell you I am dream tipsy. I have been tossed between moon and sun and stars and visions of water, wind, hills, and forests. They come to me as ancient intimates. I had known them millions of years ago. They were once within me. We parted from ourselves, I know not how or why. We have played hide and seek with each other through the eons, and now they come near. The spirit in them is as near to me as the beatings of my own heart. Now we meet again. It is like the meeting of lovers who had parted but yesterday. The immortals never forget their loves through all inbreathings and outbreathings of the universe. Come with me, Paul. There is endless wonderful traveling here. There are divine transfigurations that await us. We will be changed inconceivably as we go on. I am changed within myself. My feet here are tied to stone and grass, but where am I? Am I treading the meadows of the sun? What are these burning blossoms that glow by their own light? Who are those about me who look as if they were consumed from within by love for some ineffable beauty? Their ecstasy under those closed eyelids. Their feet are God-guided, as if they were dancers at the bridle of love and death. As his companion spoke, Paul almost came to community of vision with the poet. He saw lovely forms which seemed to emit light, and half saw the rapture of faces lit by the last ecstasy of surrender to a divinity which drew them into itself. The poet became silent, as if in his mystic travelling he had come to a being for whose remote wonder no words in human speech had any affinity. At last he came back to earth, his eyes blinking like one who has come out of a blazing room into the darkness of night. Where am I? How dark it is! How remote is everything! I am outcast from heaven. I was melting into divinity, and there came some flicker of earth into my soul, and I am here again. I am only a vagrant poet, and how little and tremulous is my song. You see, said Paul, as the poets ages ago saw into Idlatach, that many-colored land. It was so Bran saw through this world the blossoms burning in some heavenly forest. I could follow you but a little. You went away from me. Another time we must try to see together. They walked on silently, Paul leading the way into a country which was unknown to him. Earth had grown multicolored. Through hazes of light the ridges glowed with pale gold. The hollows of the valleys were pools of blue and purple shade. At last they dropped to lower levels. Paul saw a house which even at a distance created a sense of beauty and fitness, as if it was a natural outcrop of earth as rocks or trees. It was an artist built that. I wonder who. That was designed by Mark, the sculptor I spoke to you about. Mary, his wife, told me he sat for days looking at that recess within the hills until the image of the house arose before him. He says that is the form the stones there would have dreamed themselves into if they had dreams. The door to it was opened, and there was nobody in sight. The poet entered as if sure of welcome. He turned into a great room. There were many figures in clay. He pointed to some of these. Those are Mark's, and these, pointing to a multitude of little figures, are done by the young folk about here. Mark teaches them to play with clay, while Mary inspires them to sing and dance, and even to make songs for themselves. The making of figures is a delightful play to them. They never had thought of praise or profit. They see how good this is in intention. He held up a little group of two girls leaning against a rock. Has it not a natural grace? Look at these weeders, what rhythm in their bent bodies. And that dancer, does she not seem as if she was foam tossed up from some invisible fountain? The artist was delighted with the play of the children, but his eyes were more drawn by the sculptor's own imaginations. He stood long before one figure whose whiteness rose out of stone as if it was earth-born. An uncouth animal shape was heaving its haunches out of clay, with its forefeet straining against earth for complete emancipation. And itself seemed to be changing, for as in the centaur the human rises out of the animal, so from that monstrous earth-born creature rose a lovely winged figure, with face cast upward as if it was beating its way into air. As the monster had struggled out of earth and rock, so out of the brute the psyche was winging its way into the heavenly ether. That is genius, he said. Then he saw a relief. There were two airy figures flying wingless as if by their own volition. One was pointing exultantly earthwards, where a skull lay. Over the relief was carven the words, "That was once thy dwelling place." There was another mystical figure, Minerva, rising from the head of a Jove, with the vast blind face of an earth god. In all this mystic sculptor's work was the sense of transfiguration and escape. Paul would have lingered, but failing drove him outside. Mark and Mary must be nearby. Ah, there's Mary. A graceful, dark-eyed girl, a little way from the house, sat between tree roots, leaning back against the trunk and looking over a valley now growing to a rich gloom. "Mary, this is Paul." The girl greeted the newcomer as if he was a pleasant thought of her own which had just come into her mind. "You must not think it was I who brought him here." The poet insisted upon the philosophy of their coming. It was the law of spiritual gravitation. "It is a good law, Philine," said the girl. "I was going to ask for Mark, but it seems to show mistrust in the law." "Here he comes," the girl smiled. "See the law guiding his feet." The sculptor greeted Paul with the same air of natural acquiescence and intimacy that his wife had. The poet assumed control over the gathering. His quickened imagination started him on a speculation over what they were doing. "We have been in the studio. I see something there you do not see. You are rooted here as Paul is in his own place. It is I who have been the roamer over hundreds of miles of country. There are tribes of folk who are our spiritual kinsmen, inspired to just such things. There are potters and painters and poets of sorts like myself, drifted out of the suffocation of the cities. What I see is an identity of character and inspiration in all they and you are doing. It is the birth of a new culture. They are all tipsy with dream, as indeed I am myself. It was so all the great cultures of the past began, not in great cities. They died in the cities, but they were born in remote country places, in mountains, valleys, and on hills, with whisperings and breathings out of a mysterious nature. There was a music made by some master singer, and all who were bathed by that music had to dance to the tune. That unity of mind you see in ancient civilizations is beginning here. Do not the arts in the Egypt of antiquity seem to us in retrospect to be the creation of one mighty mind, the moulder of generations? The last workman who decorated a mummy case had something in him, guiding his figures, something that was akin to the solemn temple builders and the carver of sphinx and statue. Is there not the same harmony with all its variety in the Grecian mind? So it was with Chinese, Chaldeans, Hindus, and Mayas. I think the invisible player now is pulling out a new stop on his organ, and the music with a new note is quickening many spirits. I like to hear Felim talking, said the girl. He is like a gilded herald running before a great king, blowing a trumpet. But you are hungry men. After supper I want to hear all about the celestial musician. He's always telling me things I know already, said Mark, though I did not know I knew them until he had spoken. He makes me feel as if I was dark and blind with unrealized profundities. He is a disturber of slumber, said Mary. I know I shall go to bed tonight with 1,000 torches blazing under my eyelids, but I will forgive him if he comes now, and will talk after. He will turn our daily bread into the substance of fairy. Chapter 13. They sat later in the warm and friendly night. Beyond the valley a vast moon rose redly over dark hills. What a night! Heaven and earth seem one being. Carew spoke dreamily. The universe is an everyday companion, Philim, the girl spoke, but it is too silently wise. You are a rarer visitor, and the gods gifted you with flowing speech. You were to talk to us about the master singer and the new music to which we are to move. If you brood on what Mark is already doing and on what you yourself are doing, you have your answer. What is in the minds of the children who flock to you? What about those two delightful young people who tell you their dreams? Ah, you remember Rory and Eileen. They are wonderful. I met them today, oh so proud and dignified. They spoke to me as if they were ancients of the earth, far older than I was. They had been reading a colored history of Egypt and discovered they had lived before, for old Egyptian men came living out of the book. There were temples and sphinxes hovering about them. A tall Egyptian rose out of Rory, while Eileen was changed to a dusky girl with black braided hair, and the boy and girl bowed to each other solemnly and said, "We meet again." The rest of their day was a longing for that ancient home of theirs. They told me with wounded dignity, we'd go there if they'd let us. They never think when they call us children and send us to bed that we are old like that inside. How enchanting! What a romance their lives must be! They go on marvelous adventures in their imagination. Their imagination is so vivid, I think they do not know whether they lived them or only imagined them. They become all kinds of great people. Once they were air chiefs, not of boats like those which fly over our heads, but boats which blew themselves along. And in one of these boats they were back through 1,000 ages and came to themselves as they were in old Dedanim times. Once they dreamed themselves into the heart of a mountain, and they told me when they were there was no mountain at all, but a blaze of light like the sun within the world. It is out of such children the new world will be born, said Philim. Are they not dancing to a new music, linking heaven and earth in their hearts? Out of these adventures and memories will come what age in the thought, what skill in the deed, what gaiety in the heart. I think myself, said the girl, their dreaming began when the fairy fiddler came. Who is fairy fiddler? A peasant boy, a strange and most beautiful child. They call him a changeling and think he is not right in his head. He has never been to school, but he plays marvelously on his fiddle. I think he must be like the poet of the Kalevala, winds and waters, my instructor. After I heard him I lay down and cried, for he made me feel the happiness and heartache of infinite desire. I first saw him on a rock by the roadside, his long gold hair blown back by the wind. He was playing to some children, and it was the loveliest sight. The boy player, the whirling of color, the rippling of hair, and the twinkling of feet. When I would have spoken to him, he was gone, and the children scattered, their dance broken like a flower that has tumbled into pieces. The boy roams by himself over the country. I believe he must be a changeling, as they say, for when I close my eyes and think about him, I seem to see fairy lights dancing about his head. Philem's hand pressed Paul's in the dark. "That must be your boy," he whispered. "Do you not sometimes find," the girl went on, "that those you meet often create ideal images of themselves on the heart, and seem to be changing into light? Why should they not, when for every man on earth there is a seraph in his beauty in the divine world? What we really love in others is not what they seem to the outer, but to the inner vision. I believe," said the poet, catching fire from his own thought, "that the psyche holds in itself the most wonderful and indescribable forms in which it robes itself in its traveling through the spheres. I am sure, Mary, behind that mask of girlhood there is a nymph, a dryad, an oread, a goddess, and I know not what other creatures. Perhaps there is an angel. There certainly is a pixie." "There is, Philim," said the girl, laughing. "She is here now, listening to a kinsman's voice. You think I am not serious? Come and look at Paul's pictures. He is a seer, and he is painting the earth visible and invisible, all the shapes the souls take in its travels from earth to sky. Yes, if we may, we would be happy, Mark and I. You will see how much kinship there is between his art and Paul's. They are players on different musical instruments, but in the same new orchestration of life. I wish the music you imagine would draw our friend Gregor into its harmony. He haunts those who have faith, yet he derides them. Yet there must be some deep fountain of faith in him, if, as you say, it is spiritual gravitation brings us together. I think that he is striding up the road. He must have sent a thought of himself before him." "You must meet him, Paul," said Philim. "There's a kind of lofty, dark, exasperated nobility about him. He will attack us, but it will be out of a profundity of feeling which measures everything by its own depths. Is that Gregor?" he called out as a tall, dark figure passed beneath them on the mountain road. "Come up. Here is Paul Heron I want you to meet." The man he called climbed up to the grassy mound, lifted a hand vaguely in greeting to them all, then laid himself down beside them, silent at first as if he continued a reverie that had absorbed him before he was called. The poet, who had elements of subtle impishness in him, wished to rouse that dark exasperation of protest he had spoken of as characteristic. He dangled a provocative fancy before the newcomer. "I always thought the golden age never really departed from earth. Driven out of cities and palaces, it still lingers in remote valleys like this. I am now certain of this, because it has even cast its spell on Gregor. On a night like this, you could almost impose your fancy on me. God knows I wish I could think with you people whom I love more than any in the world. I would be much happier. But it is all self-begotten fantasy, this idealism of yours. It is like the flickering of light over immovable stones, or, at highest, but mirrored majesties, the reflections many times reverberated of profundities in the universe, and no more real than reflections are. Truth must be a state of being, and must include in unity or identity of consciousness the vast masonry of this earth, the deeps of space, the stars that move resistlessly, as well as flowers and grass, and you and I. I love listening to you, but I keep touching the granite with my fingers to keep my sense of the profundity and strength of things. Is not imagination our best way to apprehend truth? Is not what you have just said an imagination no less than Phelim's fantasy? Whatever reality is on us must be in the will. It is only when we find something real in ourselves, when we find we can stay ourselves against the stream of things, against our thoughts which bewilder us, even against love. Our imaginations are unreal and come and go. Desires too have their flow and ebb. All are phantasmal. The will only is the self-moving. When it is keen and burnished like a star, it may become kin with or slip into unity with the will that sustains all things. The ancients knew this. A seer in the Upanishads spoke of the hierarchy of human faculties, and above poetry and speech, above thought, above imagination, mind, wisdom, or understanding, he placed strength, and said, "One strong man can make 1,000 men of understanding tremble." It is, he said, by strength the earth stands, the sky stands, the mountains stand, and the divinities rule. So I try to nourish the will, and send what fiery arrows may be in my quiver against that world order which keeps the will in abeyance. But are not the faculties a high companionship of equals in essentials rather than a hierarchy? Asked the artist, who himself gave first place to the creative imagination. It is possible we may rise to a state where the faculties in their perfection will be blended into a unity, but here only the exercise of the will makes us aware of a reality in ourselves. I am not able to sustain that unrelaxing intensity of will that I spoke of. I am susceptible to influences from people like yourselves. Nature, too, has her own magic and can melt me, as indeed I was melted last night. You who are the naturally spiritual could not, I think, have known of the exquisite anguish of joy at an awakening of the spirit I felt. I, who had lived for 40 years in cities and had never realized in the haste and brilliance of life without, that within, under closed eyelids, there was a midnight of black, unalterable air. I did not suspect that inner darkness until my first coming to this country many years ago. I lay on the hillside and found a brilliance of color under the sheltered site and wondered at it. When I went back to the city, it had gone. But I became filled with a passion to have this sweetness of light within me, and so I returned here. It seems a frail beginning for what later brought about an avalanche in my life. It was first an aesthetic, but it was changed later into a spiritual impulse. How great a price we must pay to be made luminous within! Every desire, every thought, is either the opening or the closing of a door to that light. A passionate desire, and there is an instant thickening of the walls. To bring about a resurrection, I had to give up my place in the world, my ambition, my power, my mistresses, the riot of the senses, and at last I settled here, seeking for allies in the silences of the hills, in water, grass, stones, the sweet immortal things. But even here I can only sustain the soul from slipping back by a never-ceasing will. I realized that only when I willed was I real of myself, and that all else was fugitive and phantasmal. That is why I dare not surrender to the luxury of dream. I do not dare to travel your road. Yet, indeed, last night I was melted. I had never been melted before, and I was made partner in some marvelous sweetness in this universe. I had all your faith for an hour, and believed like a child that all the fairy tales might be true, and I might yet come to the land of promise. Oh, I was just such another sweet fool as yourselves, and I had a bitter time exercising this frailty. But that was a great happiness, Michael, the girl said softly. Yes, but I do not know whether it was not the ancient sensuousness transfigured, taking on a more exquisite form. If I had surrounded myself to it, if I had surrendered myself to it, I might have been dream betrayed into my old passions once more. There's many a lovely paradise in hell, you know. If we rest in them, the old dragons of lust rise again out of a sweet cheating of the senses. There can be for me only the way of the will. Now you know, dear people, why I am at war with the world, and why, though I love you and your ideas, I dare not admit them, for they might not be to me what they are to you, and the famished devil might take hold of them to deliver my soul once more into safe keeping of the body. There was a journey of many miles before Paul and Philim could come to home and bed. They rose with regret. There were promises of further meetings as they said good night to the others. On their way homeward, the poet said, "Did not spiritual gravitation bring you to your own kin? There are many like these you can meet in further traveling, and you will meet them," he said of Gregor. "Though he is at war with the civilization where he was once a great figure, his enemies truly are not without but within the house of the soul. Because of that intimate conflict, he is becoming a much greater writer. All his fiery arrows are sped from a bow bent in the passion of that intimate conflict. He makes his nobilities, as we all do, out of the struggle with what is base in us. I hope his battle will not be over too soon for him, for there is no one writes with such power. When he has expelled those demons in his soul, he may become a saint, but in that regained innocence of being, a great captain in the battle between darkness and light may be lost."